Okay, let's just dive right into this explainer. Today, we're unpacking a really fascinating text, Shaykh Abdullah ibn Nasir al-Sa'di's theological treatise on harmonizing reason and revelation. This work is an incredible deep dive into how classical Islamic scholarship actually approaches the intersection of heavy intellectual inquiry and spiritual belief. It's all about presenting solid, rational proofs for the existence and oneness of a creator.
Right off the bat, the author hooks us with this profound logical puzzle about our very existence. It's drawn straight from the Quran, and it essentially challenges us to stop and really consider how things originate. It's a brilliant way to open a philosophical discussion, honestly, because it completely bypasses all the dense jargon and just goes straight to the foundational logic of our reality.
But before we unpack the specific arguments, it's pretty vital to understand the context of this text. Translated by the Hassin Center for Research and Studies, the whole aim here is to impartially demonstrate how Islamic scholarship bridges that perceived gap between reason and revelation. It positions faith not as some kind of blind leap, but as a rigorous intellectual conclusion that aligns perfectly with a sound mind. So here is our roadmap for today's explainer. We'll start with the question of origins, move on to signs in the universe, dive into the innate human disposition, discuss prophets and divine law, and finally wrap up with the universal conclusion. Section 1. The question of origins. How did we get here? Let's see how the text lays down a strict logical foundation for the origination of the universe. Notice the strict deductive reasoning happening here. The author points out that there are really only three logical possibilities for existence. Number 1, things came from nothing, which he identifies as rationally impossible. Number 2, things created themselves, which is basically a logical paradox. So, by eliminating those first two as logically flawed, the treatise concludes that the existence of a creator is literally the only rationally sound conclusion left on the table. Section 2. Signs in the universe. Evidence of design. Moving on, the treatise expands this logical spine by directing our attention outward to observe the physical world.
The framework suggests we don't just have to rely on abstract logic. We can actually look at tangible evidence of design all around us. The text highlights the flawless progression of human development from just a single drop of fluid to a wildly complex being. I mean, think about the mathematical precision of the cosmos, the predictable changing of the seasons, or even the sheer instinctual brilliance of animals caring for their young. The core argument is that this level of perfect synchronization absolutely cannot be attributed to blind chance.
And to kind of bring this abstract theology to life, we're presented with a famous historical parable. It involves the renowned scholar Abu Hanifa debating a group of skeptics who completely doubted the existence of a creator. So, Abu Hanifa tells them the story of a massive ship on the Tigris River. It's filled with goods, navigating perfectly, going back and forth, all without a captain or a crew. When the skeptics call him crazy for believing such a thing could happen, Abu Hanifa brilliantly turns the tables. He asks, how can your minds accept that this vast world runs on its own? It completely forces the skeptics to reflect on the absurdity of believing in a highly complex, moving universe without a mover if they can't even buy the idea of a simple ship without a captain.
Then, the exploration shifts from the vast cosmos to something incredibly mundane, a tiny date seed planted in the earth. It's a really powerful micro-narrative.
The author points out that the transformation of a tiny, dry, seemingly lifeless seed into a massive, sustaining food source year after year is a visible, totally rational proof of a purposeful creator. The text emphasizes that if you just look closely at agricultural cycles, it reveals this highly sophisticated system of provision, and logically, a provision implies a provider.
Section 3. The innate human disposition, the fitrah. From the external universe, the text now brilliantly shifts our focus inward to human psychology.
Okay, so the absolutely crucial concept introduced here is fitrah. The framework basically frames fitrah as our built-in psychological compass. It suggests humanity is naturally hardwired to point toward a higher power, unless, of course, that internal compass gets corrupted by false beliefs or societal conditioning. It's a super compelling argument because it's derived from human nature itself. To actually prove this fitrah is real, the author asks us to picture people trapped in perilous situations, like a terrifying storm at sea. He notes how pure necessity instinctively drives people, regardless of what they claim to believe on a normal day, to call out and pray to a higher power when facing absolute doom.
This, according to the text, is the fitrah overriding everything else in moments of extreme distress.
This paradigm then contrasts two very different ways of navigating the world. It compares those who rely entirely on material wealth, who usually find anxiety and ruin when their circumstances inevitably change, with those who utilize worldly means while placing their ultimate trust in a creator. The observation here is that the second group often finds real peace and unexpected provision. And that establishes this psychological reality as yet another proof of the Creator's active presence.
Section 4. Prophets and Divine Law, Rational Proofs. This logically brings us to the next part of our journey, the role of prophets and revelation.
The premise here is that prophethood isn't just a historical claim you have to blindly accept. It comes equipped with rational proofs. The text underscores that prophets brought teachings that perfectly aligned with sound reason. Furthermore, historical miracles, like the splitting of the sea for Moses or the survival of Noah, were presented as unparalleled interruptions of natural causes, designed specifically to validate their unified message of oneness. Adding to that, the Sharia, or Islamic law, is actually presented as a rational proof in and of itself. Rather than just being a rigid list of rules, it's described as a perfectly balanced system that secures public rights, repels corruption, and harmonizes flawlessly with human intellect. The deduction the author makes is that such a comprehensive, timeless system simply couldn't be the product of mere human invention.
Section 5. The Universal Conclusion. Material versus Spiritual. Finally, we reach the conclusion of this philosophical journey, pulling all these observations together.
And the text issues a pretty stark warning about modern civilization. It suggests that scientific or material advancement, when it's completely stripped of spiritual understanding and disconnected from our innate disposition, breeds arrogance. It outlines how a purely material civilization, relying heavily on destructive weapons and ignoring ethical truths, is ultimately on a path to societal self-destruction.
Leaving us with this final provocative thought straight from the text, we're really forced to ask ourselves a profound question. If the logical, physical, and psychological signs all point toward a structured reality with a creator, how do we personally navigate that delicate balance between observing the physical world and acknowledging the unseen? It's a compelling challenge to keep our minds and our natural disposition wide open.